The night was heavy with the rumble of engines as the Hell's Angels gathered in a remote corner of the city. Their leader, an iron-willed man named Razor, stood at the center of it all, a man feared and respected in equal measure. But on this night his voice carried a different weight, not the roar of dominance but the quiet plea of a man running out of time. Razor had lived a life carved in rebellion, marked by loyalty and scars, yet even the fiercest men face the one enemy no blade, bullet, or brotherhood can conquer: fate. His body was failing him, illness eating away at his strength, but his spirit burned with a final request, a request he shared not with his brothers but with an unlikely stranger, a young widow named Claire who had stumbled into their world by chance. She was quiet, graceful, and carried the kind of sorrow that never leaves the eyes. Her husband had been taken in a tragic accident just months before, leaving her to raise their little boy alone. She lived in silence, tucked away from the chaos of the world, until Razor met her one rainy evening when his bike broke down outside her small town diner. She didn't know who he was at first, only that he looked tired, hurt, and maybe a little lost. She poured him coffee, offered him a smile, and for the first time in a long while, Razor felt something human reach past the walls he'd built. From that night on, an unusual bond grew. She was drawn not to the legend of the outlaw, but to the fragments of man hidden beneath the leather and ink, and he saw in her the kind of strength born not from fists but from survival. Razor told no one about his illness, not his men, not the world, but he told Claire, late one night beneath the neon lights of the diner. He confessed he had one wish left, one thing that mattered. Before he was gone, Claire leaned in, bracing herself for some wild request, maybe a dangerous ride, maybe vengeance, maybe something that would throw her deeper into the shadows of his world. But Razor's voice cracked as he whispered, "Just one shot. Help me see the boy I gave up years ago, just once before I die." The room seemed to still with those words. Claire's chest tightened. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected the hardened leader of the Hell's Angels to be a father carrying the weight of regret. His son was out there, grown now, raised by another family, never knowing the truth, and Razor didn't want forgiveness. He didn't even want recognition. All he wanted was one glimpse, one moment, one chance to see the life he had missed. Claire could have walked away. It wasn't her burden, but something in her heart knew the weight of loss. She knew what it meant to yearn for someone who would never return, and so she agreed. It wasn't easy. Doors slammed in her face, trails went cold, but she pressed on, carrying Razor's wish like a flame she couldn't let die. Weeks turned to months, until at last she found him, a young man studying at university, tall, bright-eyed, carrying none of his father's darkness but all of his fire. Claire didn't tell him everything, only that someone who loved him wanted to see him from afar. Curiosity pulled him into the quiet corner of a park one Sunday afternoon. Razor was there, leaning against his bike, pale and worn but alive with a light in his eyes that hadn't been there for years. The boy didn't know the truth, didn't know this stranger was his father, but Razor didn't need him to. He just watched, soaking in every detail. The way he laughed with his friends, the way he carried himself with pride, the way life had shaped him without ever knowing his bloodline. Tears slipped down the hardened man's face, hidden behind his dark glasses. Claire stood nearby, her hand brushing his, steadying him as his chest rose and fell with the weight of that moment. "That's enough," he whispered, voice raw. "That's more than I ever deserved." Days later, Razor was gone. The roar of engines carried him to his final rest. His brothers rode in thunderous tribute, but none of them knew the secret he had carried. None of them knew the quiet mercy a young widow had given him. It was only Claire who stood at the edge, holding the memory of his last smile, his last breath of peace, and though her life was still marked with sorrow, she carried something new in her heart. The knowledge that sometimes the toughest men don't need saving from bullets or battles, but from the silence of their regrets. Razor had asked for just one shot, and Claire had given it to him, shocking everyone not with violence or rebellion, but with an act of compassion that no one expected. And in that, the feared leader of the Hell's Angels found the one thing he had been missing all along: redemption. Just one shot, that's all Razor asked for. Not a shot of whiskey, not a shot from a gun, but one shot to see the face of the son he had given up long ago. Razor was the leader of the Hell's Angels, a man who had built his reputation on fear, loyalty, and the roar of engines that could shake the ground. People knew him as untouchable, unbreakable, the man who could ride through fire and not flinch. But even the strongest men are not immortal, and illness crept into his body like a shadow, taking away his strength piece by piece. He could face rivals, he could face police, he could face the world, but he couldn't face the regret gnawing inside him. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about power, it wasn't even about the brotherhood he had led with an iron fist. It was about the boy he had once held for a brief moment before walking away, leaving him to a better life, safer, cleaner, a life Razor knew he could never give. Years passed, decades even, and Razor lived with that silence, pretending it didn't matter, until one rainy night at a small town diner he met Claire, a young widow whose life had been shattered too soon. She was serving coffee late into the night, her hair tucked back, her eyes tired but kind. Razor came in soaked from the storm, his bike broken down, and for the first time in years he wasn't treated like a legend or a monster. She just saw a man. She poured him coffee, offered him pie, and gave him something he hadn't felt in years: humanity. Over weeks he came back, sometimes with grease on his hands, sometimes just to sit in silence, and Claire didn't pry. She had her own grief, her husband gone too soon, leaving her to raise her son alone. They were two broken souls sitting in a corner booth, finding comfort in unspoken words. One night Razor broke the silence, his voice heavy, his eyes clouded. "I've got one wish before I go, one shot. That's all I want. Just one shot to see the boy I gave up." Claire didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure if this was the kind of thing a woman like her should get involved in. His world was dangerous, hers was fragile. But then she looked into his eyes and saw not the outlaw, not the leader, but a father drowning in regret. She understood regret. She understood loss, so she said yes. What followed was weeks of searching, Claire knocking on doors, making calls, following threads Razor's men never knew about. She was not doing it for the Hell's Angels. She was doing it for the man who had trusted her with the last hope of his life, and eventually she found him, a young man in his 20s, sharp, determined, studying at university, a life carved from discipline and opportunity. He didn't know anything about his real father, didn't need to, but fate has a way of weaving things together. Claire arranged for him to be at the park on a Sunday afternoon, telling him it was for something simple, and there Razor stood, leaning against his Harley, sunglasses hiding his eyes, his body weak but his spirit alive with fire. He watched from a distance as his son walked by, laughing with friends, full of life, full of promise, the kind of man Razor never got to be. He didn't approach, he didn't speak, he didn't claim, he just watched, and in that moment Razor's chest swelled with pride and sorrow. Tears slid down beneath the mask of a man who had never let himself cry in front of anyone. Claire stood beside him, her hand brushing his, a silent strength holding him steady. "That's enough," he whispered, his voice cracking. "That's more than I deserve, more than I ever thought I'd get." Razor rode away that day with peace in his heart, and not long after he left this world. The roar of Harleys filled the air as his brothers gave him a sen, doff fit for a king. But none of them knew what he had seen. None of them knew the wish he had carried. Only Claire knew. Only Claire had given him that gift. The world expected Razor's last act to be violent, defiant, or legendary. But it was none of those things. It was quiet, human, and filled with love. He didn't die a monster. He didn't die a leader. He died a father who had finally seen his son, and Claire, the widow who had already lost so much, found healing in giving him that final grace. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come with fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in a single moment, in one shot, and for Razor, that was enough.